He is the Midnight Raven, and today we're looking at part 2 of a case that interested me, and that was the Torrey Pines beach murders. If you haven't seen part 1, you should definitely check that out because it does connect to this case. And part 1 was the case of Barbara Nateas, and you need to go check out part 1. So today we're going to be looking at part 2, and this is the case of Claire. So this is a similar case to the first one. Some are similar, some similarities in both cases, but are the two connected is the true solution we're trying to work out. So, in 1984, Claire, aged 14, had been staying with her grandparents in Torrey Pines for the summer. Claire, her brother, and a friend Kim would often spend their days going to the local beach. The night before Kim was due to leave the area, the teenagers decided they were going to leave the house at the dead of night and hang out at the beach together. They would sneak out of the house and hang out at the beach for a very short time before Kim would have a panic attack and they would have to go back to Claire's house. On getting back to Claire's house, Kim told Claire to promise that she would never go to the beach alone at night. Claire said she promised, and Kim then went home. So, on the 24th of August, Claire decided that she was going to go out after dark by herself to the beach, taking only a stereo with her and a bag, ignoring the plea that Kim had given her not to go to the beach by herself after dark. The next morning, her grandparents awoke and found that Claire wasn't in the house. After a search of the house, they decided to check the local area, and one place she loved to go was obviously the beach. The grandparents would go to the beach, they would call the police, and they would discover a horrific sight on the beach. On the beach was a partially clothed body of Claire. The body of Claire was found near the same spot that Barbara Nateas had been found just 8 years prior. The question was, were the two cases connected, and was there a serial killer on the loose? So the police were called and they would come to the location. The two murders had some similarities between the two cases, and we're going to explore that as we go along. The two girls were both close in age, both had been beaten, both had been strangled, both had been assaulted, and both of them had had their breasts mutilated. So back to the case of Claire. While on the beach searching for answers to the death of Claire, while standing on the beach while the police were investigating, they were approached by a man called Wallace Wheeler. Wallace Wheeler approached Claire's grandparents claiming he was a psychic, and he told them that he had found Claire's body and had been having visions of her death. Sounds very suspicious, right? So Wallace had told them that he believed that he had facts about Claire's death. So Claire's grandparents obviously told the police of this man and that he may have some information on the case. Wallace then went quiet and didn't keep contact with the grandparents, and shortly after this case had become live with the police and Claire had died, he took his own life. His death was ruled as a suicide, but suspicions believed he may have been connected or knew about Claire's killer, or he may even have been Claire's killer at this point. So, 4 years later, DNA technology had advanced and they were able to take swabs from Claire's case and to have it tested. Sadly, Barbara's case, there were no viable samples that could be tested due to how long the case had been, and back then forensics DNA wasn't as advanced. So the police still had some belief that this guy, Wallace Wheeler, may have actually been connected to the case of both Claire and possibly to the case of Barbara. So with the cases having quite similar things, the same location and everything else, the samples that were viable from Claire's case was tested. The viable samples would identify a convicted rapist named Ronald Torrey, excuse me if I butchered the name, but he had died in 2011 in a boating accident. Some believe it was suicide and not an accident. So Ronald had already died before the DNA samples, and this case had actually been re-looked at due to the gap in DNA testing. A second sample that they had from Claire's body would lead to an accomplice. An accomplice of Ronald would be found by the second DNA sample, and it would suggest that a criminologist called Kevin Brown had been the partner / accomplice of Ronald when the crime of Claire took place. So, who is Kevin? Kevin was a criminologist who also worked on the case of Barbara in the crime lab at the time of Barbara's death. So, the police would visit Kevin, and he said he knew of the case of Claire and Barbara due to the fact that he worked in the criminology department crime lab of the case of Barbara, and obviously Claire's case had hit the headlines. Unfortunately, Kevin would be questioned by the police, would be given a polygraph, and he would fail. Suspicions arose that Kevin then knew more about the case than just being a part of the case in a crime lab scenario, and that his sample had proved that he was at the scene of Claire's death. The police would take Kevin, and with the DNA sample, he would be proven as a prime suspect for the killing of Claire. So, this would of course be looked at by a lawyer of Kevin, who would suggest that as Kevin had worked on the case of both Barbara and Claire, there was a chance that his DNA may have been cross-tainted with the samples, and that it may have produced a false positive because he worked in the crime labs of the victims. So, with no DNA from Barbara to corroborate this, but only the samples from Claire that said he had tested positive as being the prime suspect with the DNA, the two cases at that point couldn't necessarily be linked, but Kevin was a suspect in Claire's. So, as the plot thickens, Kevin had worked on the case in the crime lab for Claire's case and of Barbara's. He was now the prime suspect, as obviously Ronald had obviously died. So, in October 2014, the pressure of the case had been too much for Kevin, who had been bashed in the headlines, was repeatedly interviewed by police for obviously being the prime suspect in a murder case. Kevin would take his own life. Days after the official notice, the police would come out and name Kevin as one of the prime suspects in the death of Claire, stating that Kevin and Ronaldo Torrey, if I said that right, were both the killers of Claire and had worked as accomplices to each other on the cases of Claire, although the case of Barbara couldn't be connected due to not having any DNA samples. So, on further investigation into the cases of both Claire and Barbara, police could not connect the murder of Claire to Barbara. With no viable DNA, no witnesses, and nothing at that point to link the two cases, Barbara's case at the time would become a separate case. Further investigation would show that at the time of Barbara's murder, Ronaldo was already in prison for rape, and Kevin was 500 miles away attending college. Barbara Nateas's case still remains open today with no viable suspects, and the two cases, although they were on the same beach with an 8-year gap, were not connected, although the similarities of where they were found, how they were killed, and the breast being removed and mutilated did not connect the cases enough for the police to say that both Kevin and Ronaldo had killed Barbara and had killed Claire. So Barbara's case still remains open to this day, and if you haven't seen part 1 of this, I implore you to go watch it so that you can hear Barbara's case. Barbara's case is still open and no viable suspects to this day. Claire's case is obviously a solved case with Ronaldo and Kevin being the two suspects that have been named as her killer. Why they sought out to kill Claire, we have no reason for that, and after one of them dying and one of them taking their own life, these answers will never be answered and no justice was ever received. So if you want to see more videos like this, give us a big thumbs up. Tell me down below whether you thought this case was connected in any way to Barbara's case. There are no links that we can see apart from being on the same beach and possibly having similarities. But if you want to see more videos like this, remember to give it a big thumbs up so the algorithm will pick me up. If you think this case was interesting, let me know. Hopefully you enjoyed how I'm doing this video rather than having the writing on the screen. Let me know down below if you like this way of me doing a video. Obviously, I have a script written, so my eyes do dart on occasion, and I do try and keep the case as brief as possible, but giving you details because I want you to have the full story. If you want to research more about the case, do look up the Torrey Pines Beach murders. You will find more information online. This is just a fraction of the research I did. There is obviously more facts and details out there if you want to research more. I like to do serial killer cases, cold cases. If you have any that interest me, let me know down below any you would like me to look at. I do have a playlist of all the cold cases, murder mysteries, and unsolved crimes I have done over the last couple of years, so check there before requesting any, and I will see you all very soon for another video. Take care and thanks for watching. Bye guys.